So welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the second part of this tutorial. So just to remind everybody where we are. So in the first part of the tutorial, we talked about the issue that AI agents typically need to have their objectives or goals or preferences or utility functions specified for them. And that's what we talked about in the first part, which is how to do that. And now in this second part, we're going to talk more about the other ways in which AI agents or software agents are fundamentally different from us as human beings, or could be fundamentally different from us. And also talk a little bit about the opportunities that this gives, and also how this changes a lot of things that we take for granted. So I'm going to try to convince you that maybe even things like probability theory, maybe you don't fully understand how to do that in contexts such as these, where, for example, we have imperfect recall. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples where we have to consider something that is very foreign to us as human beings, but that for AI agents or software agents could be very relevant, right? So how should you act if you knew that others could read your code? So read the way that you make decisions, for example. And again, for human beings, this is a little bit difficult to imagine, right? Maybe you can imagine that somebody is scanning your brain or something like that. Maybe to some extent, right? Like my sister might look at my face and kind of understand what I'm thinking, but not to the extent that somebody could actually fully read your code. That seems difficult to imagine for human beings. But again, for a computer program, that actually makes a lot of sense. You could, in principle, have an agent that displays its source code to the world. Another situation that you might face is that you're facing somebody, maybe in a game, that is running the exact same code as you do. Okay, again, a little bit difficult for humans to imagine. The best I could come up with these are Mark and Scott Kelly, who are identical twins who both decided to become NASA astronauts. And so maybe that's the closest I could find to an example of two people that really apparently make very similar decisions. But of course, there are shortcomings there. And you can see even in this picture, one of them left a mustache and the other one didn't. So yeah, it's hard to imagine exactly what that's like for human beings to have somebody who makes exactly the same decisions as you all the time. But again, from the perspective of AI, right, as we talked about in the beginning of the first part of the tutorial, or before we really got into the first part, software you can execute multiple times. You can instantiate those agents in multiple locations in space and time over time. And it's the exact same program, right? So that's the kind of thing we'll have to think about. And finally, another example is, what if you knew that you had been in the same situation before, but there's no way you're going to remember what you did, right? So these are examples of imperfect recall. Now, I forget stuff all the time, right? But I don't really forget it that systematically. So what does that look like? Again, I tried to find an example. The best example I could think of is the movie 50 First Dates. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but in it, Drew Barrymore's character has a condition where she forgets every morning everything that she experienced the day before. Now, that would be a very rare condition, but that's maybe the kind of thing that we have in mind here as well, right? And again, for a software agent, that maybe makes a lot more sense, right? We can deliberately decide, for example, for privacy reasons, that certain data isn't going to stick around, right? Maybe we have our self-driving car and we don't really want it to remember certain things about what we did, maybe for insurance purposes or so on. That's the kind of situation we're going to be thinking about. And so these situations are uncommon for human beings, and as a result, they're usually not really studied in decision and game theory. Sometimes they're studied maybe a little bit more in philosophy, right? Because they're such extreme examples. But I would argue they're actually very relevant to the design of AI systems. And so we have some intuitions that maybe don't really make sense in these kind of contexts. So that's what we're hopefully going to see. So all of this is motivated, again, by the design of AI agents. And they're also somewhat related to each other, I want to point out. In particular, questions 2 and 3 are somewhat related to each other. If you think about these AI systems that really consist of a lot of nodes, right? So we have a lot of nodes in the same system that are maybe running the same code, but maybe they're not always talking to each other. in a way that could get you into the second situation, right? That now one of these nodes is facing another node in the same system and knows that it's running the same code, but in some ways it still feels like a different agent to some extent, right? Because it's a different node in the same system with access to different data. On the other hand, you could also maybe think of that as the whole system being one entity, but in some sense it's forgotten certain things, right? That like, this node over here takes some action, and then this other node on the other end of the system has to take an action, not yet knowing what the first node has done, right? Maybe there's limited communication between the two. And then in some way, it's like the whole system has forgotten something that it already did over here when it has to take the next action over here. So that gets us close to imperfect recall. So that the point of that being that the second and third question here on the slide are related to each other somehow. But let's look at a few more examples to get some more intuition, and we'll do a couple of polls about this as well. As was the case for the first part of the tutorial, so the people who are here during the pre-recording can really do the polls. The people who are watching later during the viewing session, I just ask you to think about what your answer would be, and I'll read out the poll results from the pre-recording session. Okay. So here now there are going to be a couple of things. So we're going to have polls for each of them. A couple of them are well-known examples from the literature. You might already know them, but let's go over them. The first one is Newcomb's demon. What is the story with Newcomb's demon? There is a demon. If you don't like demons, you can just think of it as any good predictor, somebody who is really good at predicting people and what they will do, in particular, what you will do. And so here's what the demon did. There are two boxes, A and B. And the demon earlier decided to put a positive amount of money in each of those two boxes. So each of them will have a positive amount of money. And now you get a choice, but it's maybe not the choice that you expect. It's a choice either to get the contents of box B or to get the content of both boxes, right? So either you get just what's in one box or you get the content of both boxes. Now, this seems like kind of a strange question because I told you there's a positive amount of money in each of two boxes. We're also going to assume that you like money. So, more money is better. And so at this point, it seems like a somewhat silly question. Like, why would you not take the content of both boxes? Because whatever is an A, it's going to be something positive. So you might as well also take the contents of box A. That's one intuition. However, now here's the twist. Again, this demon is extremely good at predicting what people will do or what you would do. Extremely accurate, right? And here's what the demon likes to do. The demon likes to kind of reward people for choosing only one box. So if the demon predicted, right, but it's rewarding in a sense of like before you actually make that choice. So if the demon predicted that you would only take the contents of box B, then the demon puts $1 million in box B and $1,000 in box A, which you won't get if you take B. On the other hand, if the demon predicts that you would take both boxes, then the demon puts $1,000 in each, so much less. Okay, and now the question is, what should you do? And to really kind of drive home why this might be a tricky decision is now imagine that you're not the only one that the demon plays this game with. There's actually a long queue of people in front of you, and the demon is playing the game with each of them. And you see in this long queue of people, some people pick one box, and all those people walk away with $1 million. And some people pick two boxes, and all those people walk away with only $2,000 because the demon is just that good. Okay? So, the people who pick one box tend to do a lot better than the people that pick both boxes. On the other hand, there's still the original intuition that once you go up there, whatever money is in the boxes is already in the boxes. So why not pick both boxes? So we have these conflicting intuitions. Let's do a poll. So for the people who are here, but again, the people who are watching later, please think about it as well. I'll launch the poll. So the three options for the poll, this is the question of the poll is what would you do? The options are 1, take one box, 2, take both boxes, and 3, it depends. But in which case I would love for you to tell me what it depends on. That's the setup. Okay. I'll wait just a little bit more. I hope the people will vote. All right. I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. So we have 50% of people here take both boxes. 25% of people take $1, and the remaining 25% says it depends. I don't know if somebody wants to speak up and say what it might depend on.
Yeah, my argument was, hi, pick one box, basically flip a coin between the two, so that the demon can predict what you're doing. On expectation, you're taking 500,000 and change.
You're going to randomize.
Yes.
Okay, good. And now we have to specify a little bit what the demon does, right? So in principle, you could also have the demon condition on whether you randomize, right? So if I had been a little bit more careful reading out this slide, in fact, what it says is the demon predicts, if the demon predicts you just take B, then you would get $1 million, and otherwise there's $1,000 in each. Now, I wasn't very clear about otherwise. I just said, well, if you pick both boxes. In principle, otherwise could also be like, if the demon predicts that you randomize, there's also going to be only $1,000 in each. This is an interesting question, whether you have access to randomization that isn't predictable to the demon, right? But if you don't, then presumably that doesn't help a whole lot, right? If you say, well, that the demon isn't going to, if the demon can predict whether you randomize as well and wouldn't like to reward you for randomizing, right? So the demon says like, well, if anybody randomizes, I'm still just going to put $1,000 in it for them, or if I predict that that person randomizes, right? So that's also, that's kind of, that's on me. I didn't really fully specify the details of that. But then you can think about, well, is there some way in which you would think that you would have access to random numbers that the demon couldn't possibly access? Okay, I'm going to leave those questions aside for now and go through a couple more examples as well, as we're building our intuition. But that's a good point. So the use of randomization is interesting here. Let's do a few more examples first. Okay, next one is probably familiar to everybody here. Is just the good old-fashioned prisoner's dilemma. Okay, so here's a prisoner's dilemma, one version of the prisoner's dilemma. Hope everybody here is familiar enough with game theory to know, but so we know that defection is a dominant strategy, right? In the sense that regardless of what your opponent does, you will be better off defecting than cooperating, right? Because 3 is bigger than 2 and 1 is bigger than 0, and that's true for both players. Of course, that's frustrating. That's what we all know from the that way we end up in an outcome that's worse for everybody. But okay, and now we're going to change it a little bit. So what I'm going to ask you to imagine is that the person that you're playing against is your twin, and not just, of course, real world identical twins are still quite different from each other often, as we saw with Mark and Scott Kelly. But here, what we have in mind is not just an identical twin, but somebody that you just always agree with, right? So you grew up together, and every time in your life that you ever made a decision, you made the same one, right? So somebody asks you, what flavor ice cream would you like today? And you both say strawberry at the exact same time. But the next day, you both say chocolate at the exact same time. Your whole life, you have always made the exact same decision. Now, I am going to ask you to imagine that you still just are selfish, that you don't really care about how happy your twin is, right? Or at least that's already taken into account in the utility function here. So you still want to maximize your own utility function, not the sum of your utility functions. However, you know that your twin tends to make the same decisions as you. So this then leaves you in a situation that you might argue as follows, that you might say, look, if I cooperate, odds are my twin will cooperate as well, since we seem to always make the same decision. That way I would get 2. On the other hand, if I defect, chances are my twin will also defect, in which case I would get only 1. Well, 2 is bigger than 1, so I should cooperate. Okay, that's the argument. And let's do a poll. Okay, so now the question is, are you going to defect or cooperate in this extreme scenario where you're playing against somebody who is very, very much like you? Right, that you seem to always be making the same decision. Okay. So there's the poll. It's going. Let's see. All right. I'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. All right. Let's end it. So it turns out everybody who voted voted for cooperate. It's kind of interesting, right? Because normally in game theory, we kind of take for granted that in the prisoner's dilemma, the solution is to defect, right? And yet here, by describing the situation as being very similar as your twin, we now have people who are presumably quite knowledgeable in game theory now cooperating, though not everybody voted. Okay, let's change it very slightly. So now, basically same story, except there have been some occasions in the past where you actually did make a different decision in your twin, right? Maybe it was just once in your life, but once in your life, somebody asked you what flavor ice cream you wanted. One of you said strawberry, the other one said chocolate. Everybody was in shock that you said something different, and never happened again after that. But at least it's possible that you say something different. So let's see quickly whether that changes anybody's mind. That now we have some evidence that you could actually make a different decision. So I'm going to relaunch the poll. Let's see if people still stick with cooperate or if they go to. Okay, at this point we have 75%. Let me share it. 75% cooperation and 25% defection. Still, I would argue that's pretty significant, right? That's now, because now we're really, I would say, a lot closer to the typical settings in which we think about prisoner's dilemma, right? Usually we think about prisoner's dilemma with other human beings, maybe not extreme as here as a twin that you almost always agree with, but if so, then where's the threshold where you start cooperating? Okay. So that was this example. Of course, again, it's motivated not by two people, but really by the idea that we have two programs that are the same program playing against each other, right? If you're a program like that, then should you cooperate? Okay. We're going to unify all these examples in just a little while, but we'll do one more to kind of go with the spirit of the time. So this is not a common one, though other people have thought of something similar before. But this story I call the lockdown dilemma. Imagine, hopefully we're mostly out of this now, but imagine we're in lockdown again. And so life in lockdown is monotonous. Let's say, it's so monotonous that you kind of forget what has happened before. You forget what day it is, right? You kind of lose track of everything. But let's say that that lockdowns typically last 2 days. And now you have a choice. Every morning, you can decide to eat an unhealthy cookie or not to eat an unhealthy cookie. Here is your unhealthy cookie. I live in the south of the United States. And so we have these kind of monstrosities. This is a fried Oreo cookie. So, some people like it. It's not very healthy. Now, let's say that it works as follows, that you get, from eating a cookie, you get a reward of 1 right away. So it kind of tastes good. But then the next day, a little bit later, the next day, so maybe like 25 hours later, you get a stomachache. That is a reward of -3. Okay, so that's worse. But now let's say that maybe also due to this lockdown mentality, you've decided you only care about the day. So you discount the future to an exceptional degree. Like maybe you still care what happens like 1 hour from now, but like a whole day from now, that's so far away. You're not really going to worry about that. Okay. And now the question is, should you eat the cookie right now? Okay. So first of all, I'm not trying to get at, well, like, you really should be a little bit more prudent and care about the future. No, I'm not trying to get at that, right? So I'm assuming here that it's fine to not care about the future, or we're not going to judge that, right? So that's not the sense of should that I'm looking for. And we're going to assume that it's fine not to care about the future. In which case you might say, well, it's an obvious answer then. If I don't care about the next day, then I should just eat the cookie, right? Because it gives me +1 utility. It doesn't really matter that I'm going to get a stomachache from it the next day because I don't care about the next day. Okay, but here's an argument that maybe you still shouldn't eat the cookie. And here's the argument. So the argument is, if you eat the cookie right now, it's reasonable to say that since we're forgetting what day it is, right? Remember that. It's quite possible that today is the second day of lockdown. And if today is the second day of lockdown, then there was a day before it, right? And the day before it, you also made a decision about whether to eat the cookie or not, right? And you just don't remember what you did back then, right? You don't even remember whether there was a yesterday, let alone what you did on yesterday. And so now here's the concern that if you eat the cookie, chances are, if you decide to eat the cookie now, chances are you also decided to eat the cookie yesterday because you were in a very similar epistemic situation yesterday, right? So if you eat the cookie today, chances are that 1 hour from now, you're going to get a stomachache because you ate the cookie yesterday as well. Whereas if you don't eat the cookie right now, then presumably you're not going to get a stomachache because presumably if there was a yesterday, you also didn't eat the cookie yesterday, right? So you might argue, well, if I eat the cookie now, there's a 50% chance that I'm on the second day, and in fact, I will get a stomachache. That's worth -3. So in expectation, that's -1.5. That's worse than the one utility that I get, so I should not eat the cookie. That makes sense? A little bit of a tricky story. But so that would be an argument not to eat the cookie, not because you care about tomorrow, but because you care about an hour from now, and the fact that if you eat the cookie today, that's evidence that you're about to get a stomachache. Let's see what we get in the poll now. Next poll. There we go. So the options are don't eat the cookie, eat the cookie, and it depends. Four more seconds. Okay. Share the results. And most people here, 75% of people said eat the cookie, and 25% said don't eat the cookie. Okay, that's the summary. Okay, so rather than go too specifically into one of these for now, let's actually try to generalize across them. So what's going on in all of these examples? In all of these examples, the key thing is that your choice is evidence for something, and it's evidence for something that you care about. Your choice is evidence for what the daemon put in the boxes, or your choice is evidence for whether your twin defects, or your choice is evidence for whether you eat the cookie on the other day. And now we had these conflicting intuitions in each of these cases. There seemed to be a good argument for doing one thing and a different kind of argument for doing a different thing. And it relied on whether you cared about this evidential effect. So there are actually multiple versions of decision theory. Normally they don't really come apart, but in these kind of contexts, they come apart. And so there are more than the two that I'm about to present, but often the key distinction that is made, or the first distinction that is made, is between evidential decision theory and causal decision theory. Evidential decision theory says that you should take these evidential effects into account. Here's how you would make decisions. You have a decision to make. You look at all the options. When you consider one of those options, you say, okay, well, suppose I took that option. I'm going to also now think about what that tells me about the world. I'm going to condition my beliefs on me choosing that option. All right. And then I'm going to calculate my expected utility with respect to that. And I'm going to do that for all the options. And then I pick the option that maximizes my expected utility, or one of those options, right? And so this theory would, in fact, have you choose only one box with Newcomb's daemon, right? Because conditional on that, you're going to believe that you're likely to walk away with $1 million. You're going to cooperate in the prisoner's dilemma with your twin, because conditional on that, you will believe that your twin is likely to cooperate as well, and hence that you're going to, in expectation, walk away with more utility. And you're also going to not eat the cookie, right? Because conditional on not eating the cookie, you believe that you're going to have an expected utility of 0 because you presumably didn't eat the cookie on the other day either. Whereas if you do eat it, you expect to end up with a utility of like -0.5, right? Because in expectation, you will have -1.5 stomach pain. And of course, you do get the one immediate utility. So what did we in fact see, right? So the people here did not always follow. In some cases, they followed evidential decision theory, and in some cases not. What's the main contender is, well, it's typically considered causal decision theory. And there the idea is, look, your decision should focus just on what you actually causally affect, right? If it gives you evidence about something else that happened in the world, but that decision is not causally affecting, you shouldn't take that into account, right? So causal decision theory says that you should just pick both boxes because whatever is in the boxes is already there. You're not causing there to be something different in the boxes, right? And similarly, you're not causing your twin to cooperate. Maybe it's evidence, but whatever your twin is going to do, your twin is going to do. And finally, even with the cookie, right? It says, well, you should just you should eat the cookie, right? Because whatever you did on the other day, you don't control that. Right? That's what you do might be evidence for what you did on the other day, but if you are in fact on the second day, whatever you did yesterday, you've already done, right? So you can't change that. Okay. So those are the two conflicting intuitions. And so there's a lot of literature on trying to argue in favor or against one of these theories with all kinds of arguments. I would say most economists who have thought about it tend to end up on the side of causal decision theory, right? Of course, there are also kind of examples where it's more obvious that you don't want to take a certain evidential effect into account, right? But here we're really talking about these more extreme cases. And again, there's lots of variant, right? So the way I've specified these decision theories obviously is not very precise. The evidential decision theory one is fairly precise. The causal one is really not, right? I just kind of waved my hands about what causally affect means. And so there are different variants of these theories that really try to build this out in more detail. But here's a kind of argument that you can make against causal decision theory. Later, I'm going to make one against evidential decision theory. So like I'm in a difficult situation that I've argued against everything, I think, at this point. But so let's just see what happens. So here is another variant that kind of looks like a Newcomb's demon setting, but it's a little bit different. So here again, we have a demon, a good predictor. But now here's how the game works, a different game. This demon puts $3 into every box that it predicts that you would not choose. Okay, it likes to put money into boxes that it thinks you're not going to choose. And it does that on Sunday. And now you have a choice to open either 0 boxes or 1 box. And if you want to open a box, it costs $1. Okay. And then you get what's in the box. And let's say the demon, so now we won't even have this really extreme demon, but this demon is just 75% accurate. And now we're going to get back to the question that was raised about randomization. We're going to assume here that you don't have access to randomization, right? Or maybe you could do something like the demon. If the demon predicts that you randomize, the demon won't put any money. But let's just say you have no access to distinct randomization. Then the argument is that if you're a causal decision theorist, what you're going to do is you're going to choose 1 box, even though you know that you will regret doing so, right? First of all, why do you think well, so once you open a box, you believe that the demon was 75% accurate. So that means that probably there is no money in the box, right? There's only a 25% chance that there is in fact money in the box at that point because you chose it. There will be $3 in the box if so, but the expected value of that is 3/4, right? So there's only 3/4 in the box in expectation, and you paid $1 to open it. So at that point, you're not really happy about having opened the box. However, before you make the decision, you have to have beliefs about what is in the boxes, right? So before you make a decision, there's got to be at least 1 box where you think there is a good probability that there is money in the box, right? Because you know that the demon is going to generally predict that there's going to be a box that you don't choose, right? The demon is going to put money into some box, and so there's got to be at least 1 box that you feel there's a 50% chance, at least, that there's money, $3 in there. So you have to choose it, right? That's kind of, it's just worked out in more detail in the paper. But that's the setup. So you're going to do something. That's the argument in this paper. If you follow causal decision theory, you're going to do something that you know you will regret. Okay. Now, by the way, I put the second step on Tuesday. Why didn't I put it just on Monday? That's because now we're going to add one more step just to really drive it home. And say now that we're going to add something to the model where on Monday, the daemon actually says, look, I'm about to make you this offer that you know you're going to regret. So why don't you pay me 20 cents now and I won't make you the offer. Okay, so the daemon is giving you an option to pay the daemon in order for the daemon not to make you an offer. 20 cents it costs. And then the argument is that if you're a causal decision theorist, you would actually take this offer. You would pay the daemon to not make you an offer because you know that if the daemon makes you an offer, you're going to regret it to the tune of about 25 cents, right? Because that's the argument that we made before. Okay, so that was just kind of an example of the kind of argument that you might make against one or the other kind of decision theory. And please stop me with any questions. I think we should have time. Okay, now I want to switch focus a little bit to imperfect recall. So what is imperfect recall? Imperfect recall just means forgetting about the past. And this is something that is often considered in game theory, right? Like if you read game theory papers about extensive form games, often you'll see that there's a quick mention that we assume perfect recall, right? That we don't forget things. But for AI systems, it's very easy to make them forget things at certain points in time, right? For human beings, that's more difficult, right? Certainly if you're going to do experiments with human subjects, it'd be hard to kind of force them to forget somehow. But with software agents, that's very easy, right? Just make them not remember it. And we already see that being used for other kind of scalability purposes. But you might also use it again for privacy purposes, that we don't want the system to recall something. Or another motivation is, again, remember, like way at the beginning, I argued that these two, the second and the third issue were similar to each other. You can also think about these highly distributed systems where one node takes an action, then a different node has to take an action, not yet knowing what the first node did. That in some sense is also similar to having forgotten for the system as a whole what it did before. But things here get weird. And the best illustration of that I know is the Sleeping Beauty problem. That maybe some of you are familiar with already, but let's go over it. And here's the story. There's a participant in a study on a university campus, let's say. This is just an imagined story, right? And we're going to call the participant Sleeping Beauty. And the experiment is going to work as follows. On Sunday, the experimenter is going to give her some drugs that will make her fall asleep. Right? She's explained about all this. She consents to it all. It's all run very carefully. Now, the way that the experiment works from there on is that then the experimenter will toss a coin. That coin will land either heads or tails. Okay, it's a fair coin. Everybody knows it's a fair coin. But the coin determines what the experimenter does next. If the coin lands heads, what he's going to do is he's going to wake her up on Monday with a different cocktail of drugs. She will be awake for a little while, and then he's going to make her sleep again with the same cocktail of drugs as he used initially. On the other hand, if the coin landed tails, he's also going to wake her up on Monday, just as with heads. She's going to be awake for a little while. She's going to be made to sleep again. But in this case, he's also going to wake her up on Tuesday. Whereas in the heads case, she's going to just sleep through all of Tuesday. She won't be awakened on Tuesday with heads, but she will be awoken on Tuesday with tails. Okay, that's the setup. And so this figure here shows when she wakes up, under which conditions. And of course, you might wonder, well, what happens after that? Well, we're not really going to worry about what happens after that, but you can say, well, Wednesday, she is woken up finally in a different environment with a big banner that says, well, congratulations, the experiment is over. And so there won't be any risk of confusion with Wednesday. But we only think about Monday and Tuesday. And the key thing now, and this is where the imperfect recall comes in, is that because of all these drugs, when she wakes up in one of these conditions, so it being either Monday or Tuesday, she won't remember if she's already woken up before, and she won't have a sense of how much time has passed. So she cannot distinguish any of these three awakenings, right? You might think if she's woken up on Tuesday after Tails, you might think that she would say, oh, like this is the second time I woke up because I remember being woken up on Monday. But no, the drugs mess with her memory too much, so she won't remember that she has already been woken up on Monday. She also won't feel like, oh, I feel like a lot of time has passed. No, none of that is there. So she cannot distinguish any of these three scenarios, right? She can't form new memories during the experiment. She does always remember the rules of the experiment, which were explained to her on Sunday, that she remembers, but not what's happening in the experiment. Okay, makes sense? So when you wake up as Sleeping Beauty, right? So now I'm going to ask you to imagine being Sleeping Beauty. And now imagine you've just been woken up in one of these conditions. So you know it's either Monday or Tuesday. And of course, you don't know for sure whether it's Monday or Tuesday. And you also don't know for sure whether the coin landed heads or tails, right? It could be either one. But the question is, what is your subjective probability? And typically this question is asked about the coin. Okay, so the question is, what do you now think is the probability that the coin landed heads, right? It's probably not 1 or 0, right? Because you're not quite sure. But what is it, right? Well, what would be your degree of belief that the coin came up heads? That's the Sleeping Beauty problem. And it turns out, now at first this might sound like kind of a tricky probability puzzle, maybe something like the Monty Hall problem, where many people maybe get the wrong solution initially, but there is a clear solution to the Monty Hall problem. However, this one is controversial, right? So this is actually studied more in the philosophy literature, what the right answer is. And there are two answers that are common. There are two main camps of people corresponding to two different answers, and this really hasn't been settled yet decisively. No, of course, some people will argue strongly that it's very clear that it should be one answer or the other. But so anybody here want to make an argument or want to throw out a number that they think might be the right number? It's always nice to think about this problem for a little bit before I tell you what the camps are. But so let's see if anybody has a number that they want to throw out.
I mean, I'm not sure about the answer, but I go with 1/2.
Okay, great. 1/2. So why 1/2? Or is there? Do you have an argument?
She cannot remember, right? So there's not any information from getting up that she gets, so she can kind of like deduce better the probability of getting it H is higher or lower. Yeah, I'm interested to hear the other answers.
So if I think I got the argument. So the typical argument, I think this is the argument you're making, is that well, you could also ask the question on Sunday, right? Like, what do you think is the chance that the coin is going to land heads? Well, presumably that is 50% because we said we all know it's a fair coin. And then when she wakes up, well, she doesn't really remember any of this thing, but she always knew that she was going to be woken up, right? And so there's no news in some sense, right? She always knew that she was going to be woken up. So there's nothing to update on, is this argument, right? There's no, like, if you think as a Bayesian, well, you would only change your beliefs if you learned something new that wasn't going to be guaranteed that you would learn that. In this case, you're definitely going to be woken up at some point. So when you wake up, you haven't learned anything new. So you shouldn't update your belief, hence 1/2. Was that about the argument?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we have one possibility. One possibility is 1/2. Okay, any other number that anybody wants to throw out? Let's see if anybody can guess what the other camp of people. So the 1/2 is one camp of people with that argument, or there are many arguments, but that's maybe the main one. And that camp of people is called the halfers. Okay, so we have an argument for the halfer position. Anybody want to argue for a different number?
Well, it seems like you might go for a third, because conditional on the event of you being asked, that happens 2/3 of the time with tails and 1/3 of the time with heads.
Good. Okay. So Shengwu's argument is that it should be 1/3, because if you look at the picture in the top right, of all those 3 awakenings, only 1 is on a heads coin toss, right? That's basically the argument. Another way to kind of push that intuition might be that, okay, suppose you did this actually every week for a year. Every week, Sleeping Beauty goes in on Sunday. They toss the coin anew on Sunday. So each week is a fair coin toss. And then at the end of the year, we look back, and our Sleeping Beauty looks back and says, boy, of all those times that I woke up this year, how many were in a heads week, right? That we tossed heads. And that should be about 1/3, right? So that's another way maybe of saying what Cheng-Wu is saying. So that's the other camp, right? 1/3. So there we have the thirders. So those are the 2 main camps, halfers and thirders. And now let's take a poll at this point before we go for break, and see how people feel about this. Okay, so the options that I gave in the poll. So the question, first of all, is just a Sleeping Beauty question. If you are Sleeping Beauty and you're woken up in this condition, what should you believe is the probability that the coin landed heads? The answers that I made available are 1/2, 1/3. So those are the main positions in the literature. You could also say some other specific number, or I left an option of something else, like maybe multiple numbers, or the whole thing is not really well specified somehow. Yeah, so those are the options. I'll give it a couple more seconds. All right. And so here we have 2/3 of people saying 1/2 and 1/3 of people saying 1/3. So we have a split. And this, when you do this with audiences, this actually is fairly reliable. You will get a split of people. This is a fun one for academic cocktail party kind of situations. If you have a table of 5 people, I'm pretty sure you're going to find somebody taking the 1/3 position and somebody taking the half position. If you like that kind of thing, I encourage you to try it because it's pretty reliable. Okay, of course, that doesn't really tell us what the right answer is just yet, or why it would be difficult to figure out what the right answer even is, right? Again, you might worry that something about this problem is somehow not well specified, but it's not really clear what, right? It seems like everything is specified that you would want to know, right? I told you what the probability of the coin toss is. Everything seems fairly clear. Okay, so maybe with that, we go for break. And then we'll return to the Sleeping Beauty puzzle and how to analyze it after the break.